Today is Saturday, May 7th, and today we're talking about the uproar surrounding a new initiative within the federal government. Earlier this week, we told you about the Disinformation Governance Board. It's a new group within the Department of Homeland Security. Officials say it'll fight the spread of misleading or false information that could have real-life consequences, especially when it comes from the Russian government or human smugglers. But there's not a lot of information yet about how it will work. And some even worry it'll turn into something like the fictional Ministry of Truth that pushed state-sponsored propaganda in the novel 1984. So we hope to break down the arguments from both sides of this and clear up any confusion you may have after seeing some of the headlines. To help us do that, we're welcoming back the woman known as America's government teacher, Sharon McMahon. She's the host of the popular podcast, Sharon Says So, and you'll also find her sharing useful info about politics and history with her more than 800,000 followers on Instagram. So let's get into it. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for coming back on the Newsworthy.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's talk a little bit about both the pros and cons of a board like this. Let's start with the pros. Why might a Disinformation Governance Board like this be a good idea?
Well, Secretary Mayorkas, who is in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, says this is going to be a small working group within the Department of Homeland Security. It's not going to be this large, major department addition. And it's specifically aimed at dealing with things like mis- and disinformation surrounding topics of immigration and things related to Russia. So thinking about it in terms of immigration, we do know for sure that misinformation has spread wildly throughout places like Haiti, throughout places like Central America. And that disinformation has caused people to travel to the southern border in an effort to enter the country because they were told that the borders were open. So a pro might be being able to counter some of that disinformation that is occurring, particularly on places like Facebook, in places like Central America and Haiti. We might be able to send the correct message that, in fact, the U.S. border is not open, for example.
And similarly, U.S. intelligence has shown Russia has meddled with the U.S. election. So Secretary Mayorkas has also pointed to Russian disinformation as something that they plan to go after.
Mm-hmm. And, nobody wants Russia meddling in our elections. We're all united on that. That's a bad thing for America. I think one of the challenges with ascertaining exactly what a group like this might do is it's difficult to know how they will proceed without infringing on the rights of Americans.
Where is that line? How do we know this board doesn't cross it? Let's talk about the potential cons here and what critics are saying about it.
People just don't know what the board is going to do. So, of course, anytime that something is not clearly communicated, it just leaves so many question marks hanging out in the air. It allows people to fill in the gaps with, well, this is, an Orwellian scenario come to life. It's a ministry of truth. It's, you envision like the court in Harry Potter. It just allows your imagination to run amok. And then, of course, Mayorkas says this is not going to be the case. He specifically said that no Americans will be spied on. His exact quote was, "This board does not have operational authority and will not monitor American citizens." So operational authority in this context means like it's not going to conduct the business of the United States government. It's not going to be out there arresting people or anything along those lines.
And I want to go back to a reference you mentioned previously about what critics have compared this board to, the fictional Ministry of Truth from George Orwell's novel 1984. How would you explain that reference and these comparisons?
Well, a Ministry of Truth, of course, has this connotation that there is some kind of third-party external arbiter of everything that is sort of capital T truth, that they get to decide what the truth is, and they're going to tell you what the truth is. And that those liberties are removed from the individual citizens. That's the reference. That's the implication, is that somehow this board is going to be in charge of what is true, and it will no longer be up to the citizens. So of course, Mayorkas very much resists that characterization. He says that it's going to be the opposite of a ministry of truth. But I still, even as a person who is highly educated in the workings of the United States government, I still don't have a solid handle on what it actually is going to be doing on a daily basis.
And to the point that the government shouldn't be deciding what's true and false, should the government have any role in online content moderation?
Here's the thing. Somebody needs to do it. We can't have no online content moderation whatsoever, because that quickly dissolves into Nazis and child pornography. That's what online spaces would look like if there was nobody monitoring things. So right now, the job of content moderation falls to the various platforms themselves. It falls to Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And some people think that that is the way it should be. They're the business, they own the space, so it's up to them to monitor and moderate. Other people feel like there should be greater regulation of the companies that are doing the monitoring and the moderation, that there should be government involvement in regulating the moderators.
Still ahead, the First Amendment does not always protect our speech. Sharon explains what is and is not allowed under the law. And at what point is disinformation itself a crime? Sharon also weighs in on the woman tapped to lead this new board. But first, let's take a quick break to thank our sponsors. So if you've been listening for a while, then you know I'm a first-time mom, and as parents, we are forced to learn fast. And the latest thing I've learned is that my baby and I both love Pampers Cruisers 360 Fit diapers. Now that I have an older baby, he is super active, and Pampers Cruisers 360 Fit is Pampers' best fit and protection for an active baby. So unlike regular taped diapers, the 360 gap-free fit stretches around my baby's waist so it doesn't gap on his back. My baby can now crawl around and continue learning how to walk and climb leak-free. And the material feels super soft and comfortable. I can tell my baby actually loves it because he's finally stopped tugging at his diaper. Also, in case you didn't know, Pampers is the #1 pediatrician recommended brand. So buy in store. You can look for the Pampers Cruisers 360 Fit if you want the type I've been talking about. And don't forget to download the Pampers Club app today to start earning rewards with every diapers and wipes purchase. This episode is also brought to you by KiwiCo. As a parent, it can be hard to find creative ways to keep your children busy and challenged. Well, KiwiCo helps make it so much easier. And especially with spring arriving, there's a new energy in the air that encourages kids to connect with the world around them, and KiwiCo's monthly science and art projects celebrate that. It's the kind of thing that can lead to a lifelong love of learning. It's always so fun to get our KiwiCo crate. Of course, Dax loves it, and I love seeing him get so excited and engaged with something new. For older kids, they'll get projects that will help them discover things like the science of magic and the engineering of a domino machine and the chemistry of cooking and so much more. So step into spring and celebrate the season of discovery with a KiwiCo subscription. There's no commitment, so you can pause or cancel anytime. And right now, the Newsworthy listeners can get 30% off your first month plus free shipping on any crate line with the code Newsworthy at KiwiCo.com. That's 30% off your first month at KIWICO, KiwiCo.com with the promo code Newsworthy. Okay, now back to my conversation with Sharon McMahon. Does the First Amendment protect lying?
Depends on what kind of space you're talking about. The First Amendment does not protect lying on the stand in a courtroom. It does not protect lying if you're at an airport and you yelled the word bomb. Even if you're later found to have lied about that, that's not protected. But is it a crime to lie to your friend? Or to post, like, I definitely was not at that restaurant last night when you were. Is that a crime? No. But sometimes lies can rise to the level of crimes, in which case the First Amendment does not protect people's speech in relationship to the commission of a crime.
And how does that get decided? What is protected and what's not?
That is done largely by state legislatures and the federal government when they're criminalizing certain types of activity. So, for example, if you are planning to hire a hitman to take somebody out. That planning of that crime, your speech surrounding the planning of the crime is often not protected, is likely not protected. That's decided by our elected representatives, by and large, when we're talking about what makes something a crime versus not. In terms of larger guidelines about what is protected speech and what is not protected speech, many of those guidelines are carved out and illuminated by the Supreme Court.
And is disinformation and misinformation a part of that at all?
This is an area of law that has not at all caught up to technology. Is mis and disinformation a crime? It can be, depending on if it violates an existing criminal statute. But the idea that thou shalt not post false things on the interwebs, that's not a crime. That's not a law that exists on the books. But if your speech, your disinformation or misinformation leads to the commission of a crime or the planning of a crime, then it can be illegal.
And let's just use this as another little educational opportunity, the difference between misinformation and disinformation.
Misinformation is something that is wrong, but it usually doesn't have an intent to deceive surrounding it. Perhaps it was just like I'm going to repost that. That is a great quote. And it turns out that the quote didn't come from the person that the original poster said. That's technically misinformation, although you had no intent to harm. Disinformation does indicate an intent to deceive other people, to mislead with knowingly false information. So a lot of it boils down to, was the person trying to purposely lead you astray, or was it a little bit more innocent, but still wrong?
So back specifically to this Disinformation Governance Board, the leader of this board is Nina Jankowicz. She has researched Russian disinformation. She spent time in Ukraine. She came here on the show, on the Newsworthy, just before Russia invaded Ukraine. She talked specifically about the likely war and the history that led up to that. But now her entire career, her political opinions over time, her online history is all now under a microscope. What do you make of that? And do you think that she is qualified for this role?
Well, she certainly has a lot of knowledge about the region and the geopolitics of Russia and Ukraine. No question. She certainly knows far more than many people in government or many average citizens. But what makes somebody qualified for any government role? That is the million-dollar question. There has never been a settled determination on that because it's based on people's opinions. What makes somebody qualified is very much a matter of perspective.
What do you think happens next with this Disinformation Governance Board?
Well, it has not been well received, Erica. I don't think there's a lot of Americans who are like, great idea, slow clap. I'm not seeing that out there in the Twitterverse. I don't know that the administration will come right out and be like, fine, we're dissolving it. I don't think that that's necessarily what will happen. But I do think the board is going to potentially die quietly, or potentially Ms. Jankowicz might get a different job in the administration, or they might rename it. Perhaps a rebrand is in order. But I don't see them going in to the American public sphere, guns blazing with this Disinformation Governance Board is the best idea we've ever had. I don't think they can claim that it is.
Any final thoughts or just a final takeaway on this issue for our listeners?
My takeaway from this, honestly, is, man, the rollout of something important, you got to have your messaging on point. I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. It doesn't actually matter to me. But this is a truth about government in general. Your government spokespeople better be able to answer questions about what it is that you're trying to do. You should have clear messaging and communication about what some kind of initiative or board in this case is going to do, what it's not going to do, what the roles of the people involved are going to be, so that that can be communicated succinctly and understandably. And so we don't have imaginations running wild with every single headline being about George Orwell.
Well, thank you again to Sharon McMahon for chatting with us today. Be sure to check out her Instagram and podcast for more facts about democracy, politics, and history presented in a fun way. We've linked to some of her great work in today's episode notes. And of course, we'll continue to follow updates on this story right here on The Newsworthy. We give you all the news you need to know each day in our regular 10-minute news roundups every weekday morning. So we'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.